So I know a bit about the founding of the organization, but I was not personally part of the founding of the organization. A couple of things. First, I'd like to say congratulations for going in and doing this work. It is beautiful work. It is, communities need it desperately. And what you are bringing is it's life-changing and life-affirming, and you will love it. You'll work hard, but you will love it. I also want to say that those of us who are operating villages right now would love to help, and that is really a core piece of why we stand here. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help any possible way that we can. I want to say that one of our founders wrote a document of Neighborhood Falmouth in the first 5 years. I'd be happy to email that to you if that's of interest. I'm going to give you my email address right now. Quite easy. director@neighborhoodfalmouth.org. I'll say that again, director@neighborhoodfalmouth. For those of you who need the extra help, F as in Frank, ALMOUTH.org. So be happy to send that to you. So it took about 3 years, for the 3 years plus for Neighborhood Falmouth to get founded and open its doors in April of 2009. So, and that is about standard for what it was at the time. 2 years in, they filed for a 501c3. There was a lawyer as part of their working group. And to get the 501c3, they had to have articles of incorporation, bylaws. They had to have a name for the organization. I think they actually had to pick an age limit too. We have a bottom age limit of 50. We have no ceiling. And we have a couple, until recently we had a 101-year-old, and we have a couple of 100-year-olds. So it's pretty fabulous. There were I mean, you probably heard a lot of this, so I won't go into it in too much depth, but there were community meetings, community mailings. There was a core group of about 10 people who met, I think, about every other week for about 3 years getting this going. There were task forces and different segmentations that everybody worked on. We also live in a small town, which some of you may also. So it was not so hard to put letters to the editor in the community paper, to get articles written for the community paper. When those things happened and then there was a community meeting, the turnout was always much larger than expected thanks to that extra bit of help. I would also say that the local Senior Center Council on Aging was nothing but supportive. I know that people worry about that relationship, and I know it hasn't always been easy for some forming villages. Our experience in Falmouth, the Senior Center group said to us, there are more seniors in this town than we can reasonably handle. If you are willing to work with some segment of them, that gives us more opportunities to help more people. This is a big game, and there's room for more than one and more than two in serving seniors. And in fact, and Falmouth Senior Center is a big game in town. They do a wonderful job, and they do a lot of things. Neighborhood Falmouth, we really serve people at a certain window of time in their aging process. So we feel anecdotally we are giving people 3 to 5 more years in their own homes. We can't prove that, but there is going to come a time where people need more than what we provide, and that doesn't mean they have to move out of their homes. They just need more services than exclusively what we can provide to them. So some of the things that I think made the founding of Neighborhood Falmouth work pretty well, and here we are 10 years later, so I guess it's worked pretty well, is that some of the core people were fairly influential in town. They were well connected, and I think that really helps. They had the idea that they wanted to open their doors with $50,000 in the bank, and that somebody told me anecdotally that they thought represented about 2 years of budget. In fact, I think it's because of this sort of influential core group, they connect with a local family foundation who offered a $25,000 challenge matching grant. And when they ultimately opened their doors in April of 2009, they had $100,000 in the bank. So that's terrific. And, you know, and that's our experience. That doesn't mean that that has to be anybody else's experience. That's just our experience. They also, another thing that went into that, that bank amount was that they offered discounted memberships to people before the organization opened, with the promise that if, when the organization did open, people had changed their mind, they would get a full refund. We still actually give anybody a refund for any unspent months if they're unhappy with our service. That has virtually never happened. Occasionally, if someone dies during the course of their membership, the families will ask for some monies to be refunded. Even that is very rare for us because people are so happy with the experience at Neighborhood Falmouth. So the organization was founded, like I said, in April of 2009. They realized within a couple of years that they would not be able to fully cover all their operating costs just with membership. So we actually mirror what the current sort of general model is that about 45 to 50% of our operating budget comes from membership. The remainder comes from regular nonprofit fundraising things. So we do 2 annual appeals every year. We have 1 or 2 fundraisers a year, one big, one little, and we write grants. And that seems to work right now, although we are growing, and so our costs are growing as well. Our office for the first 5 years was housed in the first, our first executive directors were a retired couple, and they actually housed the office in a room in their basement. So we actually had a very small operating budget. They shared a small modest salary between them. And that's so we really have been growing very slowly and thoughtfully, I think. So here are a couple of statistics about us before I get into then some of the challenges and learnings and 10 years in. So in 2009, when we opened our door, we had 54 members, 35 volunteers, and 12 donors. In 2014, that's 5 years in, we had 102 members, 64 volunteers, and 162 donors. And women comprised, at that time, women comprised 68% of the total membership. I didn't look up that number, but it's higher now. And now in 2018, so that's the last full year on record, we had about 125, 130 members. We have about 130 volunteers, of which about 70 are really core active volunteers. And we have 366 donors. So some more stats. We are a paid village model. That was a decision that was made by the working group before we opened. There, of course, are merits to both things. Our group felt like this provided greater stability and greater professionalism. But, you know, there are a ton of successes in every single model. So that's obviously a very individual choice. Because we're a paid model, we're spending money, and our membership fees are also higher. So our membership fee is $600 for an individual and $900 for a household, which is any 2 people living together. We also do half-year memberships, and that tended to be a seasonal membership because we're a seasonal community. It's not a seasonal membership. It's just a half-year membership, and people feel a little easier taking 6-month bites, and that's totally fine with us. Our budget is currently $180,000. We provide over 4,000 services per year. And these are mostly the same services that you just saw from the Berkshires, what they're planning. It's a lot of transportation. So now we get into what we are 10 years in. So I don't think anybody imagined that we would be all transportation. And we're not literally all transportation, but 95% of what we do is transportation. And yes, we do have social opportunities. We do tech things. We have lunches out. We have people who will go for a walk and make a social visit and clean a closet or take the trash to the curb and the high light bulb and all that stuff. And those things are definitely important. And with our group, average age 86 of our members. Volunteers' average age is, I'm guessing, about 74. And so for our group, eyesight is the biggest issue. So we don't have our members dipping into our database. We actually use the Helpful Village database. We're actually happy to be the ones on top of doing all the data entry there. Our volunteers do go into the database and sign themselves up if they choose to use that path to signing up. We also provide an email back and forth that volunteers who are less tech comfortable can use for signups. What else? We have no limit to the amount of services that anybody can request per month or per week. That's something that I feel is going to happen at some point. We'll probably adopt a 3 requests a week limit. But at this point, we've looked at the number of people who request more than 3 rides, typically rides a week, and there's only about 4 or 5 people who do. So we don't actually get back a lot of capacity if we cut them off. So at this point, we're moving forward. I think the greatest challenge for us right now is one that I think was spoken about earlier this morning, and that is recruiting and retaining volunteers. So we have an amazing and wonderful volunteer base. And because many of them go to Florida in the wintertime or have grandchildren and bucket lists and other things that they want to do besides drive for Neighborhood Falmouth, we have a waiting list. And that is something that, you know, part of me feels proud because we're so good. We have a waiting list. People are just coming in the door. But the reality is that's the demographic. And we are a very relatively inexpensive, if you break it down, organization. I should say we have a scholarship fund. 10% of our members get a full, get their membership paid for thanks to our separate scholarship fund. But this waiting list right now is 3 to 4 months. There are about 25 people on the waiting list. I think that by mid-May and into June, we can start moving people quickly off of that. Not every single person, when they get approached again, will say, yes, I'm ready for this. So, you know, so it'll sort itself out a little bit. Is something, you know, as we market around the community, sometimes we find ourselves saying, well, we don't really want to market to members, we just want to market to potential volunteers. And that's not the way we want to be, because we really want to be inclusive all the way. And the volunteers of today are the members of tomorrow. We got to keep working on a multi-generational approach so that we, you know, trying to get families on, you know, service days in yards all over the town or whatever, to just engage a new, younger group that we can put on an email list, frankly, and kind of steward them until they are ready to be fuller-time volunteers. So we do find that there are some people who are reticent to take advantage of services, but mostly we have a very active group. I think that's about all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Ted.
Susan, you know when the group started 10 years ago, did they consider being all volunteer or paid staff? Do you know what the decision was, or why they made that decision?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, the question is, when the group was forming, the working group was starting, they, you know, discussed paid or all volunteer style village, and what went into making that decision. So I don't know that piece of it. I do know that they, at the time the organization opened in April of 2009, there had been paid executive directors, this older couple who were sharing the job since January of that year. So nobody was paid prior to the opening apart from just the setup months. But I think they felt that it created more stability because, you know, volunteers come and go, and you know, something gets started out of the passion of one person, and then that person moves out of town or something like that, and can you find somebody with the equal amount of passion? Now, on the other hand, I mean, there are totally Nauset neighbors down the road. They're like the beacon for the all-volunteer village, and they seem to be extraordinarily successful. So, you know, both I think can work. Any other?
We have a question from Berkshire's.
Yes.
What's the population of Falmouth?
So we were talking this over. I am going to go with, it's like a Jeopardy answer. I think it's 33,000 maybe. Do you think that's right? Say it again. 11,000 seniors, yeah, and I think our total population is in the 30,000. Yeah, the low 30s, I think. Any other question?
My question was, you made a distinction between members, volunteers, and donors.
Yes.
Can you just give a quick?
Sure. So in some villages, members, so the question was the distinction between members, volunteers, and donors. And in some villages, people who join are members and volunteers. In our, they aren't necessarily. We recruit you as a volunteer, and that's what you do. You see the list of people who you offer. We, you know, do a pub night out with you a couple times a year, and we love you up. Others are really all about the people who are requesting services. Although I do have to say I'm working harder to help make members' time with Neighborhood Falmouth more meaningful, because these are, although they are struggling in transportationally and some other ways, they want to give back, especially to this organ that's giving them so much. So I now have started some phone trees that they are involved with, and anytime we need cookies, I'm on it with these people. And then donors are people who we send out the appeal letters to. Our appeal letters, they're just community people who believe in what the organization does. So yeah, so, and whenever we do a fundraising appeal, we appeal to all of the members, to all of the volunteers, any family we might know of, and then other people in the community that we have. Anybody else?
Here, you want to come over here? We have a question from a cell. Just give us a minute.
Hi. I want to know if Ollie, anybody at Ollie at Boston College, Massachusetts, contacted you at all, your organization. They are looking in your direction right now. UMass Boston is looking down towards the Cape area. They've been unable to move their teaching staff down. And I wonder, does anyone contact you? Are you willing to reach out, or I can reach out and get you information?
Okay, I didn't really hear that question, but it was something to do with Boston College and reaching out.
No, let me try.
Sorry.
Let me go over the mic. The OLLI programs are targeted at people that have retired, who want to get more education, want to take courses, okay? The college at Boston, UMass Boston, wants to move and get involved in your area, okay? Not as far down to Plymouth if they can. I wonder if anybody from that organization has contacted you in your group.
No, not to my knowledge. So the question was, has anyone from Boston contacted Neighborhood Falmouth about, it sounds like course offerings or other kind of engagement opportunities for seniors in Falmouth? No, I haven't. I'd be delighted to speak with anyone.
Okay, I'll make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And of course, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, emails, whatever. Again, you know, we're really happy to help you be successful and get off the ground, because it's great work.
I have a question. In terms of caregivers, with volunteers, does that relieve the burden on caregivers, or do you see how much visibility into that?
We, yes, we, you know, we have an uneasy relationship with caregivers, and the way we solve that is that there can be times that we can take a member to a doctor's appointment instead of, let's say the member is a man, and then his wife then doesn't have to do that trip and can then have, go to the grocery store or use that time differently. What we're not comfortable with, but never say never, is the idea of sitting with somebody at home and being a caregiver for them so that the normal caregiver can leave the house and go do errands outside of the house while somebody, one of our volunteers, watches. And the discomfort there is just concern that it's just really about the health level of the member. If they needed to use the bathroom, are they mobile enough? Can they do that themselves? Because we're not going to ask our members to do anything that is remotely medical, unsafe, put them in an awkward position. So it's a tricky thing, and occasionally we get questions, and I feel kind of anguished sometimes that we can't help people in that way more, but we can't. So.
Okay, I guess we can transition. Ted?
Yeah, Ted. Thank you all.
Mention one thing. In the back of the room, I've left a form for you to put your name down if you.
What was that? Well, first of all, after all the prior speakers, I have to tell you, you're a tough act to follow. As you know, I'm a little bit of an outlier up here talking tonight because we are very young. Hope to be village. We started organizing in early February, so we're only a month or so into it, a couple months into it. But when Tom asked me to speak, I told him, well, Tom, I'm really going to attend this conference as well as some of our other fellow steering committee members because we want to learn. We want to be sponges today, and so far that's happened. So what I'm going to tell you today probably won't be as informative as some of the other speakers, but I did want to tell you a little bit about us. First of all, we are called Barnstable Neighbor, the numeral 2, Neighbor. And we had a long conversation about that name. We felt that neighbor was very important, and neighbor to neighbor was very important for our village. We wanted to make sure. And also in tonight or today in hearing some of the other speakers, I see that every village is very different or could be very different. There's lots of models, and so as we go through our process, we're going to try to pick the best model that works for us. Background, the town of Barnstable, and this is 2017 data. There's a population of about 44,000 people. That, of course, swells a little in the summer months. 65 plus, currently about 10,000 of those 44,000 are 65 plus. The projected number for 2030, so a little over 10 years from now, is about 16,000. So that's our market, if you think about it in those terms. We have a large market in our minds. Our process, first thing we did, and thank goodness we did, we went to talk with the director of our senior center, Maddie. Maddie's in the room, Maddie Noonan, and that was the best advice we got. Start there, and so we did. And we now feel like we're complementary partners, and we're learning so much from Maddie, and we're learning as we go along. So Maddie, thank you for being that person. The second thing we did is we talked to a couple of established villages, certainly Nauset Neighbors, and then the other one was Beta Sound, which is a fairly new one. Nauset Neighbors covers the Outer Cape. Beta Sound covers the towns of Dennis and Yarmouth. I want to go back to the senior center for just a second. One is I mentioned complementary services. We probably, and most likely, will be offering services. Our senior center, or soon to be named, what's it going to be called? Barnstable
Adult Community Center.
Barnstable Adult Community Center. So it's no longer going to be called the Senior Center.
Well, we'll be Council on Aging. We are at Council on Aging.
Council on Aging. Well, number one, we felt great support from Maddie, as I previously mentioned. She was also able to match up a number of us that had a conversation with her and said, well, you know, anybody else interested in starting a village? So most of our steering committee came together because people had talked with Maddie or mentioned it, and she got us together, and so several months ago, that's how we got started. We have formed a steering committee as of February 7th, and we meet every 2 weeks. We have joined the V2V network, which we found to be very helpful. We use the checklist as we go down our tasks, and now we've modified our own a little bit. So one of our steering committee members modified a task list that we're using, and it works, we think, very well. As I mentioned, we're going to be services only. Senior Center offers many programs. We're very fortunate in Barnstable. And we're going to be volunteer only, at least that's what we think right now. We could change our mind, but that's where we're heading, we think. So we're in learning mode. We're looking to be operational sometime in the future. That's real definitive, isn't it? Probably 2020 would be a best guess, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. And we've heard a broad range of timeframes. So one of the things we like to say is, at this point, since we're still absolutely in learning mode, is we really don't know what we don't know yet. So today has been very helpful. So here's where I'm going to turn it back to all of you and tap your collective experience. So all three sites, please. I have three questions, and hopefully, since most of the folks here, other than Susan, are part of our group, I'd like to ask three questions. One is, what is your best advice to forming a new village? Number two, tell us about your successes and why. Why were you successful? And number three, tell us what you might do differently if you started one direction and decided to go a different direction. So those are my three questions. So Tom, we're going to test your conference capabilities here. So number one, what is your best advice to a new village steering committee? And if anybody on the other sites could help answer that, and Susan, we appreciate your advice to us. Anyone?
Can you hear me, Gary?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Howard Shapiro in the Berkshires. I would say to you, from a steering committee point of view, we did as you did, started with a steering committee, and we very quickly formed 5 task teams working in different areas of the responsibilities for operations. We had a task team dealing with marketing, we had a task team dealing with finance, with operations, with member services, and with relationships with other organizations in the community. So that was very helpful, because frequently the work gets all done by one person, and that was not getting us quickly into where we wanted to be. So that dividing up the work was very important.
Great, thank you, Howard.
Hi, Ted. It's Barbara Sullivan.
Hi, Barbara.
So I have a couple things. I have 2 hats. The first hat is being a director for almost 10 years of a village and being there when it started. Take your time. Do your resource, do your studies, do the committee work, and get your financial sustainability in order. The other hat is the V2V hat, where we have seen villages that race into opening and they're open for a year because they didn't do all their homework and lay the groundwork, the really great groundwork, and that includes a strategic plan. And again, going back on your financial sustainability component of it. The rest will always fall into place, but getting some of those in is key to a successful village, I think.
Great. Barbara, let me ask you a follow-up on that, on your comments. We have talked about a strategic plan, a business plan. Our thought was that it will help define us if we work on that document. Is that your feeling as well?
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Life changes every day, so don't make it a 5-year, feasibility or strategic plan. Make it, the strategic plan. This start to your opening date, and then creating a strategic plan when you open for the next 3 years, because things change. And I didn't hear you say it, but have you done your feasibility studies? Have you done a survey? Those are really key components. And there's so many inventive ways to do a feasibility study for your community or a survey, so to speak. Get a local politician to help you get a survey out. Have a town hall meeting. Have a public forum in the library. We have a village in Ohio, they got their local mayor to send it out in the utility bill, the water bill. So, there are a lot of ways to send out a survey, but that's going to be your key component. And like I said, when you step back, look at every, and divide up the work. Don't be, the one person. It is a committee. It's what the gentleman just said from the Berkshires. Get people involved and divvy out the responsibilities. You've got the tools, like you said, the network has so many documents. Thank you, Dick Elkin. Utilize them, but get your ducks in a row and take your time. That's the best part.
Thank you, Barbara. And by the way, Dick and Esther Elkin were here earlier. They had to leave, so we've talked with them frequently, and I think we will continually.
Nobody else has any.
Go ahead, Tom.
Anybody else? I have something I can say, but relative to forming a village, our experience in Reading was very, very different. And what Barbara was just saying makes a lot of sense. The organizational structure, the strategic planning, the finances, and so forth. We came at it from a very different standpoint. A couple of us got together because we were of an age where we wanted a village. And we began to give some talks in the local library, and it generated a lot of interest. That interest just led to the bringing together of a bunch of people, and we formed and launched without really any structure whatsoever, other than the steering committee and the fact that there were about 40 people that wanted to get together and form what we outlined as a village. We knew quite a bit about villages. We talked about everything from NORCs to co-housing to shared housing to villages. And we were very fortunate, those of us who had put together the sort of background and perspective on what you could do in terms of providing services. We weren't the ones to run it. And that was a key issue, is identifying some people. And they stepped forward almost immediately. And we proceeded on a build it and fix it kind of basis. But we don't have the kind of situation, as you and I discussed at lunch the other day, where that you're trying to address a lot of needs, particularly the transportation needs and other needs in the town. That provides a very different basis, and consequently you have to really think organizational structure, your finances, and so forth. So anyway, that's a different cut. And we were inspired to do what we did by the town of Lexington, which again was slightly different, although we sort of followed there for a while. Rachel Rosenblum, who had experience in back, brought a bunch of people together in 2008. They sat around, figured it out, and they launched it.
We're not here.
Yeah, it was just giving you that conversation, just do it.
Patti Sullivan from the Mass Council on Aging. By the way, I think one other point. I think you made a key point here, and that is, if you're going to address the needs, the culture, and so forth in the town, who better to go to than the Council on Aging person or an organization who should know very well because they deal with that.
Sullivan, our for the Massachusetts.
They won't hear you unless you talk.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Patti Sullivan. I work for the Massachusetts Councils on Aging. I also ran a startup village in Arlington, Virginia that bordered next to Barbara Sullivan's in Mount Vernon, Virginia. I just wanted to comment that the Cape has a unique opportunity to tap into other resources. It's the only, I just spent a couple of weeks down the Cape, sort of trying to get a feel for what's happening there, and I was really struck by the networks and systems that are built there, in part because of the size of the community, but also because of the work that's going on around age and dementia-friendly work. We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes. But one of the things I found fascinating with the Cape is that when I met with the public health person, Vera Herrick is her name, she came prepared with all this data about villages on the Cape. And so I think you are unique in that you have somebody in the public health department who's asking questions about villages, who has a view of a specific role that you guys are going to play on the Cape, and has already surveyed the Cape about their knowledge about villages. So I was struck by her interest. I've never seen a public health official care about growing villages in their part of the world. So I was excited about that, and I hope that you'll be able to tap in more into her work, because she certainly is a huge fan of villages and was quite disappointed when she did this survey. And Maddie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they have about 3,000 respondents. Very few people knew what a village was on the Cape. No surprise, but she is asking the question because she's trying to raise your profile.
Great. I failed to mention too, thank you for that comment. I failed to mention that if you don't know the town of Barnstable on Cape Cod, it has 7 actual villages that are, and you probably have heard of Hyannis and maybe Barnstable, which is also a village in the town of Barnstable. We have West Barnstable, Cotuit, Centerville, Osterville, West Barnstable. So we have Marstonville. Sorry, I knew I'd forget that. So we have 7 villages. So that's part of what we're working with, and also that some of these villages are very different. They're diverse demographics. We'll be looking at all of that and trying to understand it better as we move along. So I'm looking at the clock, and we're supposed to finish, but Tom, could I have about 2 or 3 more minutes?
5 minutes, sure.
Second question was, tell us about your successes and why. So maybe pick a success, and why was it a success? What did you do to make it a success? Anybody from either from LaSalle or from Berkshire?
Well, I'll speak to one. I think we had a success in Reading. We just talked a lot, got people involved, and as always, capable people step forward. Give them the opportunity, and they'll more than be willing to serve.
Good. Thanks, Tom. Anybody else? How about question 3? Tell us what you would do differently. Anything you did while you were developing your village that you might do a little bit differently with 20/20 hindsight.
Looks like we've all been successful.
Well, yeah.
I just want to make a comment, speaking from Arlington Neighborhood Village, and that is, we started out with a spoken hub. We're a county-based system, so we could only serve in the county. So we didn't compete with Barbara in any way. But we started out as a spoken hub, and we just found that it was unsustainable, that it was too confusing to people, and that it just was so cumbersome. We went from being Arlington Neighborhood Villages to Arlington Neighborhood Village, and focused our efforts in one system, because, as I said, the structure of trying to support a bunch of smaller villages was a big mistake for us.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Well then, thank you, and Tom, I'll pass it back to you.